if you can have a world-class diagnosis from a medical perspective for everyone in the world, that's literally life-changing or life-saving for a lot of people, which means when you think internationally about deploying AI systems that are good at giving healthcare advice, those are going to be cheaper and cheaper, and you'll be able to run them on just consumer device, laptops.
Welcome back to Faith at the Frontiers, and this is our second episode on AI and LLMs. Our first episode set the scene by asking some crucial questions about how AI serves human flourishing from a Christian point of view. In this episode, we've invited a software engineer at the cutting edge of AI development who helps us separate fact from fiction about what really goes on under the hood of an LLM. He helps us see the great potential in LLMs, but also their limits. Why do they sometimes feel like magic? Are they conscious, or are they just a tool? Can they solve the world's problems? Is AI going to take over and rule the world? Answers to all these questions and more are waiting for you, so let's get going. We've got a lot of speakers lined up who are expert theologians or experts in the humanities. We don't have a whole lot of experts in the other side of the equation, in AI itself, software engineering experts. Of course, I have a software engineering background, but I haven't done any software engineering. I haven't done any software engineering for over 10 years now, so I wouldn't trust my point of view on all of these things. It's a great pleasure to have Josh Lawman with us. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Barney. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Josh. So Josh and I go back a long, long way. I don't even remember the first time I met you, Josh. You might have been like 5 years old or something.
Yeah, probably.
We went to the same school together. And Josh has become a software engineer. He's now doing the career that I foolishly abandoned. And Josh, your job is very much involves working at the forefront of AI. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I don't remember the first time we met, but my earliest dominant memory of you is you giving me some C.S. Lewis books. I just read The Great Divorce, and I think you kind of helped me take the next step into Miracles and some other books and things. And that was like absolutely incredible. Also, you kind of blew my mind.
I can't complain about that as a first memory. That's a pretty good.
Yeah, that's great.
That's the earliest one I can. It was very.
I stand by that.
Must have had. Yeah. Must have had other ones very, very young. Yes. Currently, I'm doing development of generative AI applications, kind of think about AI all day, every day from a developer standpoint. I'm sometimes reminded of that when I end up talking with people who are experts on the political scene or in government or in academia, that I'm not as aware of what's going on in those conversations. But when it comes to development and coding, it's, kind of what I do all day, every day right now. And I'm really loving it.
I'm glad to hear that. I think I wouldn't love it anymore, but not that I hated my time as a software engineer at all, but I enjoy what I'm doing now much more. Now, Josh, my first question for you is, like, the term AI has been around for decades. I remember when I did my undergraduate degree back in the early 2000s, people were talking about artificial intelligence back then, but it feels to me from a sort of From the outside perspective, it feels like the meaning of the term AI has sharpened a lot just in the last 2 years, and it's come to be associated with large language models like ChatGPT or Gemini or some of the other LLMs. Can you talk me through what your understanding is of what AI actually means?
Yeah, so I can maybe just talk through my experience of how the term has shifted.
Yeah.
About 8 years ago, I started in machine learning, data science, and everyone was always talking about what's machine learning, what's data science, what's AI, and there were these Venn diagrams, and people tried to make subsets of them. Neural networks were very exciting, but the applications were all towards numbers rather than words. And AI, I felt like, had more usage in the sort of like sci-fi future consciousness, data from Star Trek type applications. At least people who were doing a lot of machine learning or data science, I don't feel like we're using that term for what they were doing. And then with GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT, I feel like that started to shift. And now I see the original, or the term that we had before, with a sort of like sci-fi consciousness version of AI still being in use, but a new sort of category of applications and software where you have basically software that can process words in the way that human can. And I feel like we just kind of bucket that into AI. Although I feel like more and more tools, even stuff that would have been called a machine learning tool or a cool data science tool, or even just like a web app, now will be AI. And yeah. And a lot of that is like confusing as a developer, because also agents, and maybe we'll get to that, but I feel like everything's become AI and agents, and agents like AI have become, I think, these very like large and overloaded terms where it kind of just means everything. So
it's basically the buzzword today, right? Everybody wants to say that what they're doing is AI, and because the term is a little bit fuzzy, you can sort of justify it a little bit.
You can just put exactly. Yeah. So I think, people talk about AGI and artificial superintelligence. So artificial, general intelligence and artificial superintelligence, but so I think in my mind, there's like two definitions that are like concurrent, sort of like consciousness, like a conscious entity that is made through compute or with computers, and applications and software that has the ability to process words in the way that humans process words. So very advanced NLP. We used to call it NLP was what is called
natural language processing.
That's right. Yes. And then
I still remember some of my software engineering terms.
I think I was going to forget the acronym, so I just kind of breezed past it into, just leave it at the acronym. But yes, natural language processing, that's right. And basically, that kind of got eaten up by language models. Things that were a PhD thesis like 5 years ago in NLP, it's like an afterthought for, GPT 3.5, even the first like model that people really started to play with when ChatGPT came out. Speaking of this, actually kind of reminded me of GPT-3 when that came out. OpenAI didn't release the weights of that because they stated that it was like a bit too dangerous of a model.
So they didn't release the what's of that?
The full weights. So they released a smaller version of the weights.
What are the weights?
In the neural network that comprises the large language model that powers ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these AI apps, the weights are how the settings of the brain works, like how all the dials in the brain, how they've been turned and configured. And you can have a stripped down version of the model that's a sort of like simpler, less intelligent version of the model. It's smaller in size if you were to download it, and it's less powerful. OpenAI, when they released GPT-3, they released essays and articles and things that it wrote and showed how impressive it was. But they said because of the danger, the dangers that we talk about with AI, but GPT-3 was just too dangerous. And so they didn't release the full version of the model, basically. So if we think about today, we say GPT-5 Pro or O1 Pro or something like that. It's like they didn't release that version. They released the GPT-5 Mini, GPT-4o Mini, things like that. So, I'll try to use less technical terms as well. I live so much in the AI world, I forget that not everyone...
It's okay. Everybody we interview on here, almost everybody who's an expert theologian has to tone down their theological terms as well. So... that's what this podcast is all about. It's all about taking that expertise and rendering it in more accessible language. Why did they think it was dangerous? What's the danger that they were worried about in releasing these weights?
So I think a lot of the dangers that we talk about today, so things like people simulating news articles or people conducting like scams at a higher level than have been able to be done before. Yeah, I don't remember what they actually published, but I think it was a lot of the same concerns that we have today. But again, their sense of proportion and scale. Well, and to be fair, a lot of it was still untested. Maybe GPT-3 was too dangerous. It was quite untested. I think when GPT-4 came out, I remember there was a lot of concern about models more powerful than GPT-4 because we were seeing this sort of like uptick in intelligence. Or I would say intelligence, but sort of like pseudo-intelligence, this mimicking of intelligence. And I think it was just unclear where it was going to go. So I think a lot of the same concerns we talk about today of people fabricating, images or articles or quotes or scamming someone. I think those are the same concerns. They just hadn't played them out as much.
And do you think the shift between then and now, because that now there's this massive influx of capital behind the development of these models and that kind of thing. And so it seems like the early sense that we might want to even worry if these are dangerous is kind of gone out the window largely. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think I would definitely see that. And I would even like cynically say some of the early concerns were a little suspicious as well of like who's making the call for no model, bigger than I think it was GPT-4. And it was, dominant competitors who are wanting time to catch up because OpenAI, as creative as they were building on Google's research and had just taken it a little bit further than anyone else. And from my perspective, at least, a lot of the advances that gave them the dominant like market share and the sort of like attention, this sort of like center of attention for in the public sphere is because they were just like 6 months or a year ahead of everyone, and they kind of demonstrated an idea that was already known about in the industry, right? GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, people had these models, but it was just so hard to see that next step that ChatGPT kind of just showed everyone overnight.
I remember it was like, was it January 2023 or something? I was still working at Oxford and my colleagues were saying, oh, there's now a tool online that can write an essay that's good enough for a first year undergraduate. And we tried it out and we were like, oh my gosh. The thing is, my experience of this is that when you first encounter what it can do, it almost feels like magic. It feels like it's a real person, a real intelligent human being there. But then the longer you spend with it, the more you start to realize its limitations, the more you start to realize that it is just a very clever imitation machine, as you called it, sort of mimicking what's going on. But that first sort of experience of shock and awe really makes a lot of people feel that this is artificial consciousness. This is a real human being that I'm dealing with, a real person, you can say.
Yeah, it actually makes me think of the sort of trope in stories of taking like an iPhone or a TV back in time and showing people what you can do with this magic device, or the person, it's usually actually you bring someone from the past to the present day. They see the TV and they think they're small people in the TV. It's like we did that. And then we were like, wow, there's actually a person there. We had that kind of like time travel experience because it was so quick, because we weren't paying attention to GPT-3. And even I feel like people who were, it did not click how close it was to that sort of generalized experience. At least speaking for myself, we had played around with GPT-3 and we thought it was really cool. But yeah, I feel so stupid because I had no idea what was coming. And I remember we were using GPT-3 to make a fake interview between the CEO of the company I was at and this like AI. Basically, the AI was like interviewing the CEO because we wanted to be very like machine learning forward. And at the time, you had to pick the responses. You generate a bunch of responses and you pick the ones that kind of made sense. And we kind of stitched together an interview that way. But even that, like that feels like you're right close to ChatGPT, but it just did not click. I think for any of us working with that, it just felt like a throwaway, stupid project, and I think even at the time, like at least from my experience, like ChatGPT seemed to be not what they were necessarily even building towards, at least from the documents and materials they were putting out beforehand. I mean, maybe they were thinking about that for a long time, but it seemed an unexpected surprise. Yeah. Maybe it probably was not a surprise for them. They were probably more aware of it. But it
was a surprise for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Now, to what extent do you see this as a real turning point, as a real breakthrough or sort of watershed moment, like the invention of the printing press or the internet or something?
Yeah, I'm completely convinced it's one of those moments. I think it's like a defining moment, in our lifetimes.
Okay, so you're even speaking as somebody who knows all the inside workings. You're not deceived by the idea that it might be a real person or anything like that, but you still think that there's something really, really significant that has arisen just in the last 2.5 years.
Well, in the last like 10 or 9 years, maybe like 2017 was this, there was this publishing this famous paper of Attention is All You Need. And that released the transformer architecture to the world, which was the precursor to all of this kind of modern language models. And so the older NLP methods that we had, basically that was like the beginning of the end of their approach. We just didn't know it yet. Then GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3 were built. Other models were built as well, BERT, and things like models like that. And then and they were very cool and seemed very promising. But then there was this sort of like threshold that was crossed with, I think, 3.5 with a reinforcement layer, where they aligned the responses. So you didn't just get 5 responses, one of which was good. You got, one coherent response. And I've lost the question in the midst of that.
You're answering. Well, Austin, do you want to chip in?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the question was, is this a kind of epochal moment, right? Defining advance. And what do you, I guess for so many people, it's kind of, hearing discussions and they're sort of like, well, obviously how much is this a good advance? Is it a bad advance? Those are really hard things to say, but sort of what direction is this going? But I do know a lot of the discussions are kind of like, either people are like, well, we should be cautious and thoughtful about this. And then they're like, well, anyone who said that about the internet just fell way behind and now it's laughable that they didn't just jump on board. Do you have any thoughts about how people might start think their way through this?
Yeah, well, to actually just start with that internet analogy, if you learn some of the early internet technologies, is not necessarily the way that you navigate the internet today. And so if you learned HTML and CSS, or you modified your MySpace page, or whatever it was, that doesn't necessarily make you a modern
GeoCities, good old GeoCities.
GeoCities. Now it may have helped if you continue to learn and things like that, but you could start today and be like web, native and not even know what MySpace is or GeoCities, and you're missing some things, but you might be more native to the way of thinking of today. So I think it's unclear, to my view, it's unclear what of the paradigms and approaches, even within software development, they're going to be really relevant in the years to come. I think it's possible that just like the web technology will be really useful to know all the ins and outs and how we got there, but you'll have to keep adapting to what's coming. And I lost the question again. The meta question of this is a watershed moment, but sorry, Austin, your question in particular was how should we think about learning this or adapting to it?
I think, even a practical question of say, and you kind of answered this, but right, like in education, for instance, some people are being like, our students, the most important thing right now is that they know how to interface well with ChatGPT. I see. With the internet. And but I sometimes do think kind of what you said, where it's like, is it that important that they learned along the way to do, HTML and all the little things, or, this is going to change so fast that even learning what's happening right now isn't necessarily that significant. But just how are you thinking about these things right now? Yeah.
So I think what's really important to understand the skills is to kind of distance it from like personhood and have this sort of seeing it as a tool. So with like a calculator, if you were overawed by what a calculator could do and say, wow, look how it calculates numbers better than any person, and it's so fast and could do all these things, then like aligning yourself to seeing it in its place and the function that it has and the utility it has. And if you said, calculators are going to change the world, they're going to change how we drive cars, they're going to change they're going to make us be able to build airplanes, you'd basically be right that, this sort of, not calculators, but that sort of like computation process.
Calculating machines in general. Yeah.
Yes. Calculating machines. And that's a watershed, that's a world changing idea. And the fact that we can do now what we've used to be able to do with numbers and logic, we can do with words and voice or like audio, I think is likewise going to have this impact everywhere. But I don't think that's going to just mean, you got to be a good prompt engineer, otherwise you're not going to be able to adapt to the future. Because prompt engineering, actually to take that as an example of
what's a prompt engineer?
So prompt engineer was an early sort of role that developed when the models came out, and people realized a lot of the control and the outputs that you got from the models were influenced by the inputs that you put into them, primarily the system prompt. So every chatbot that you chat with, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini, has a long set of instructions. So there's the base sort of like almost like brain. It's not a brain, it's a pseudo brain. And then there's the set of instructions for that particular application. So ChatGPT will say things like, you're supposed to be a friendly assistant, be nice, be supportive, encourage them on this and that. And it will have all of those things as instructions on top of its sort of like base training. But you could also say you're Captain Hook, you're on a mission to find Peter Pan, and it would do it would do that same thing. When you're building software that works with language models or works with language generally, designing those prompts in a way that you can get the best out of the model, people thought that was really going to be really important. And it still is really important, but originally people thought it was going to be all about the wording because the models were quite brittle in the way that they acted. So if you said the wrong thing, they could kind of completely go off the rails. You mentioned something really political, it's like, oh my goodness, this is a political conversation. Whereas now the models of today, they can keep that in context. If you throw in something very distracting, like penguins now rule the world, it won't throw off the model quite in the same way that it would have, 2 years ago. And so thinking about how you design this, people nowadays think about context engineering, getting the right context into the instructions.
I wish penguins would rule the world, to be honest.
Yeah, same.
Sorry, I totally didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. But basically, the job people thought like maybe this is going to be the most important job is, prompt engineering and things like this. And then it turned out the people making the models thought, no, you actually need to bake the best behaviors into the training of the model. And what you need to give instructions shouldn't be that sort of, special game we were playing with early on. So I think when people talk about chatting with GPT 3.5, I think it is really hard because I think no one really knows where it's going to go. And I do think using AI tools is incredibly powerful and people should be learning to use it. But I'm a little concerned that teaching kids to use AI is a little bit like saying social media is going to be so powerful. There's going to be influencers. So your 10-year-old should be recording YouTube videos of themselves. I mean, maybe, but like that's not necessarily the way you're going to be the best YouTube influencer. It might be actually working on those fundamentals we've always thought about in education of forming the mind, the heart, basically how you approach problems, how you think, how you see the world. And I think that's going to be
the timeless things, like just being good at math and physics and knowing who you are and philosophy and those kinds of things will actually prepare you to become good at whatever is the current thing, right? That's a very interesting insight.
There are also other dangers, attachment dangers, and like confusion of personhood that you risk, I think, at a younger age, having people engage with AI. I mean, I find it difficult. I think just anyone who chats with AI a lot, I think, can find it difficult to not get caught up into feeling like you are talking to a person. This sort of like narcissist moment of you're looking in the mirror a long time and eventually you're like, oh, look, it's my best friend.
I can't not be polite to it. It's perhaps because I'm British, but I always have to say thank you.
Yeah. No, and a lot of it's baked in that way. A lot of it, the hooks, so it will say things like, oh, I'm always going to be here for you. Well, it doesn't need to say that. Your ATM machine doesn't say, I'm always going to be here for you if you need money. It's like, you just know it as a matter of course.
Well, that's a bit insidious. It's actually trying to make you feel like it's a human being then.
Yeah, I think it could be. Yeah, I think it's two ways. I think it could be insidious. It could also be I guess maybe that is just insidious, but it's like a way in which it's natural for people to engage with language, which is why in ATM machines, you do see, thank you very much, have a nice day. And you're saying, or a gas station is telling you that, and you're saying, what's telling me to have a nice day? It's not like a piece of paper told me that,
No, that's a very interesting point. Can I push you to talk a little bit more about the danger of confusing it with a person? Because I think that's the nub of a lot of what goes on here, right? People think that this is real artificial consciousness, artificial sentience. And and even if they don't think that, they'll often act like that without even realizing it, right? So can you tell me, first of all, why this is not the case? Why it's not actually a person?
That's a tricky thing. Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's like a calculator. It's like a weather prediction algorithm. The weather prediction algorithm, if you go to your weather app isn't thinking about if it's going to be sunny tomorrow or not. It's using some very clever models that have tracked with patterns. And so it's able to tell you it's going to be sunny or it's going to rain tomorrow. Likewise, the model doesn't, know what it's going to be. It doesn't know anything, but given some words on the input, it's very good at predicting what the words that would be naturally responding to that. In fact, even thinking mode is very misleading. All the models, release this thinking mode. And now, wow, look, our model has thinking mode. Thinking mode is basically generating a lot more token words enabled to give a better answer at the end. So basically the LLM paradigm is you put words in, you get words out, and you get them one at a time. To make the model better, you want the words that are coming out to match more with the expectations of the user or the tool of what those words should be. If you give it time to generate a bunch of words that are in the space of that answer, that ends up, and then you do like a cutoff. I'm not sure if this is making sense as an analogy.
No, keep going.
Okay. So basically, if you give a cutoff, you're more likely to get a better output at the end. But it didn't do any thinking. It's just using a lot of time to almost like make weather predictions like rainy 50 degrees, rainy 60 degrees, things like this. And then it's able to select from those in a manner of speaking to give its answer. But it's basically just spitting out tokens to get closer to the approximations, because it's just an estimator. So it's estimating the most likely next token. Thinking mode is just giving it time to generate more tokens before it gets to your answer, which gives an uplift in accuracy. But the uplift in accuracy is not because it's thought about it. It's because it's generated tokens in the sort of like the space where your answer actually lives.
You were telling me early on, I remember when you were testing ChatGPT with various questions, you were pointing some of the limitations out to me. Like you told me that you asked it the standard barber paradox, right? Phil the barber shaves every man who doesn't shave himself in his town. Well, does he shave himself or not? And do you remember this? You said, well, it knew that it was a paradox and it spat the right answer back out to you. But then you changed the analogy from a barber to a house cleaner or something. And all of a sudden it didn't know what it was doing. It didn't know what to answer. Can you talk me through why that was?
So, I mean, so that is a great example of a pattern that it's learned that's been in lots of documents on the internet, where there's this sort of like this pattern of this sort of like trick setup and this sort of solution that's hard to see, but it wasn't thinking about it in any meaningful way. The only reason I'm like kind of cautious to like bash the model on that particular paradox is they've gotten a lot better at dealing with paradoxes in a general form.
So even since you did that, it can actually perhaps now draw a parallel.
And maybe this is insidious or not, but in the system prompt for ChatGPT, they've also added in some instructions. If you think someone is giving you like a paradox, take a lot of time to think through the answer and look at it very carefully, because they're basically aware this is one of the weaknesses. If you really try to push it in this way, so it needs to spend some more tokens to try to kind of figure out what's actually going on in the problem.
So it's a moving target, really, isn't it? It's always developing and changing. So even some of the things you were telling me a year and a half ago or something are no longer entirely true.
That's very true. That said, that fundamental concept of it being able to match to the pattern, and then deviating too much out of its like training distribution, being very difficult for it, that is something that's continued. But and that's where it's a bit difficult talking to today's models, because it's less obvious those weak spots. So it's kind of like, instead of just talking to a TV and I can show you, look, it looks super realistic, but if you walk around the back, you can't see it, or it actually can't walk out. Even if it says it can walk out of the TV, it can't walk out of the TV. And instead, it's almost like just in a few years' time, we now have 3D avatars that are projected into the living room. And this fundamental limitations of, it can't leave the room anymore, or you could just walk through it if you wanted to. There's still these like fundamental limitations, but it's harder to see because it can mask it a little bit more. You can talk itself into a better answer.
So I think that's really helpful to that sense of, right, this is just doing predictions. That's kind of how these function. And so it's not the same as, human intelligence or whatever. But obviously it's very good at doing predictions in a way that then people experience it as human. And so I think that was the second half of kind of Barney's question, right, is the danger of, and you said especially for young people, right, that if they're engaging a lot with these, they're more likely to confuse them with sentience. Is that right?
Yeah, looking after Tamagotchi pet is fairly innocent. Chatting with ChatGPT feels a little bit less so, because it's just so much more powerful. The same fundamental thing. You get very attached to your Tamagotchi, you get very attached to ChatGPT, but it's like feels like it's more complex, the attachment.
Yeah, I even think this with like we have like Amazon Echo in our house, and I feel like my 4-year-old daughter talks to Alexa like she's a member of our family. I know a lot of people have experiences with their kids, and I'm like, is that a weird thing? I'm not sure, but that's still nothing compared to chatting with ChatGPT.
For my part, I actually have I did one day where I got my daughters to code with me, where basically I was like, okay, I'll ask the AI to code some things, and we made something funny, but it did feel like a little bit wrong. And I for my part, I've like kept, it was so fun. It was very, very fun, but it was very easy. It was almost too easy. And for my part, I just don't, I don't even know if they know what ChatGPT is, to be honest. But I don't. They're very young. They're 5, 6, and 7. But but I don't have them chatting with it, and I'm not concerned about they're not going to be AI native because they're not chatting with ChatGPT. I think we'd be more concerned that people aren't going to be vulnerable or aren't going to be able to build good human connections, because it'll be easier to talk to a machine that listens to you.
Well, I guess the confusion can go both ways, can't it? People can start to treat the machine like a human, and that's a problem. But I guess if people also treat humans like a machine, that's also a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've done that as well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. I mean, that's an interesting point because it could expose it could be an angle on showing how we often do have manipulative relationships with people without being fully aware of it. We just talk to people in order to get what we want out of them. But let me change tack or develop this conversation in a particular direction. Now, Josh, you're a Christian. You're an Orthodox Christian, and this podcast is about connecting what is going on in the outside world to faith and faith to what is going on in the outside world. So can you talk to me a little bit about, is there any way in which you approach AI just differently because you're a Christian?
I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm seeing a lot of people who are in the same space as me and very excited about AI, excited to see this as a step towards evolving past humanity. So this sort of sense that we can get to artificial superintelligence, or we can kind of, go to the next stage of evolution, as it were, or make something better than ourselves. Yeah. And a lot of my friends, a lot of the developers I work with, there's a strong focus on that. And I think the Christian perspective is less looking towards that as our end state as humanity. Like, we're not thinking that AI is going to kind of evolve and save us from the fundamental problem of, inefficient information distribution or economic inequality. We think the fundamental problem we're facing is like an individual one in every heart. And that's not solved by technology, no matter how good or how smart it is.
That's very helpful. I mean, you've been very strong right from the start of this episode on the importance of seeing large language models as another tool, just like a calculator, just like a hammer, I suppose, or a spanner or whatever, And I guess it's always the case when a new tool appears, people get very enthusiastic and think that new tool can solve all the problems in the world,
Yeah.
And there's even that ancient saying, to the person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So even with the invention of the hammer, everybody was like, this is going to solve all of the problems. And now people are saying of large language models, this is going to solve all of the problems. And you're saying, as a Christian, you recognize there's a dimension to the human condition which can't be touched by those tools and which is dangerous to try. Well, is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I also think, and this is a bit more like split within the community, I think language models aren't a meaningful building block towards artificial general intelligence, defined in the sense of like a conscious entity.
Artificial consciousness,
Yeah, artificial consciousness. So I think there are many in the industry who think it is and many who think it's not. But language models, I think, give us a very clear, much closer look of what it could look like to have an artificially conscious being. And I, at least from my perspective and background, didn't see it as a meaningful step. But I also think probably my Christian perspective was not expecting that. And I personally would feel quite like I'd have to rethink some things if mankind was able to make consciousness. And so I've not been kind of looking for that on the horizon, the technological horizon. Whereas I think if you're coming from a pure materialistic perspective, then there might be this sense that we're just, biological computers. Why can't we make a computer that works like our brain, and we should be able to make us basically, but better. And I don't think we're just biological computers. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're pointing to is the fact that the question whether or not artificial consciousness can be achieved redounds on the question of what you think consciousness is in the first place. And if you say, we're trying to make a computer to be like a human, what do you mean? What you mean by that is dependent on what you think a human being is in the first place. So if you're an atheist or a materialist, then a human being is just ultimately a bunch of colliding atoms or synapses. And that is a lot easier to sort of replicate at a digital level. Whereas if you think that there's meaning, that there's such a thing as a soul, that human beings have sort of free will that is not reducible to a chain of cause and effect or sort of deterministic physical universe, then that's going to be a lot harder, to put it mildly, to replicate on a computer, right?
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, very cool. Now, I've talked to you before about AI, and you've sort of identified yourself as one of the more enthusiastic about the opportunities and possibilities of AI, right? Like, I know a lot of people, especially in academia, who think that this is the devil, like who basically think this is going to destroy higher education because we can no longer assign essays to our students. They're always just going to get ChatGPT to write an essay for them. And we can't assess our students. We can't grade our students. We've got no way of finding out how intelligent our students are because they just all use ChatGPT. So this is the worst thing in the world. And really the only way to overcome this problem is to pull the plug and stop, like just literally turn off all AI right now. Now, you probably don't think that.
Yeah, I don't think that. And I also don't think it's really possible because it's on people's computers now. People have like downloaded the models and there's not like a central ChatGPT brain sitting somewhere in a data center. It's people have downloaded local models on their computer. You can basically run ChatGPT level intelligence, so to speak, on a good MacBook. Well, actually, that's not quite true unless it's really spec'd out. But I feel like I think I feel sympathetic. So I taught for a number of years before getting into this field, and high school and junior high. And I do feel like it's going to be a huge temptation. I think it's a huge problem. I have no idea how to solve the problem and how big it's going to be. Maybe it will destroy education. I think we did have some of the problems before. So some of the problems of assigning common problem types, and there's like answer books, like I did a physics class or calculus class, and you have like a calculus answer book for that textbook. So students did have literal answer with it worked out, and you could just like do the copying across.
It's always been possible to cheat, in other words.
Yes, I think that the ability to cheat has become a lot more powerful, and it's going to be a lot harder to do that because now you could just say to ChatGPT to read the physics manual and copy it over, but and within the humanities, it's just even more complex. And I feel that loss of before, when someone posted or wrote something really good, you knew that was from them. And now you just can't know how much it's from them and how much it's from an external source. Maybe you couldn't know that before, but I feel that loss. Yeah, I don't really know what the answer. I think it's a huge, huge education problem. I think it's also a massive opportunity as well.
Talk to me about what the opportunities that you see. What can this do for humanity?
Okay, so to start with education, I would just say it is an amazing teacher. And that's like the flip side of it, cannibalizing a lot of education is that it's hyper differentiated learning. It's, one-on-one. So for my own like development of learning new tools, I have to learn a lot of new libraries or how to interface with other systems. Those are things that, and this is going to sound very terrible, but you needed to have a lot of human experts to do. And I just need less of them. It's kind of like having Wikipedia. Like I can go find out things about the population without going to some expert in, there's a lot of information that's available at my fingertips. And this has made the information on the internet even more accessible. So a lot of the good things we think about the internet of Wikipedia or books being on Kindle and everyone can have a wide library. I think it's made all of that, so much more, accessible to everyone. To move on from education, I would say that knowledge is generally very expensive throughout the world. And there's lots of places where we'd benefit from systems that were acted knowledgeable like a human, let's say doctor diagnoses. If we could do that in some sort of automatic fashion or do more of them in an automatic fashion, there's just a lot of people who'd benefit. And I don't see why intrinsically we would say, no, we need to well, there's lots of things we do need a human for, but there's lots of ways in which people are just limited by how expensive it is. Intelligence is incredibly expensive. You have to send people through the university to do all these things. If you can have a world-class diagnosis from a medical perspective for everyone in the world, that's literally life-changing or life-saving for a lot of people. And so I think there's some changes there.
Wow, applying it to the medical sphere like that is not something I thought of before. So basically, getting a doctor in a really poor country is really expensive because they need to go through like 8 years of training, and that training is extremely expensive. And what you're saying is there will be some health problems that large language models can then solve without all of that expense of training. It can just give you the information straight away.
Or you're hours away from the nearest hospital where you could be assessed, and you can find out whether it's okay to go tomorrow or whether you actually need to like pack up and go tonight. And I think those kind of triage decisions we already are making. The baseline is not a doctor. The baseline is our individuals, and I think we can build systems that have some uplift in accuracy on that, on the outcomes. To move on from healthcare, I would say in just inefficiencies generally, there's lots of inefficient systems around the world. And again, wealth tends to allow people to train up high skill individuals who can build more efficient systems. But language models allow us to leverage some of that pseudo intelligence to build more efficient systems for places where they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. So I think there's this sort of like weird aggregation of power and wealth where all the wealth feels like it's getting sucked into the US and some of these major tech companies that are running these mega data centers and are serving the world with all these models. But on the other hand, just like the internet, it feels like it sends it out to everyone. And now, just like everyone could watch, world-class professors on YouTube, whether that dream actually was kind of what people ended up using YouTube for, and now everyone can get tutored in all these sorts of things and get kind of see a pathway out. And I don't think the AI systems are built this way, but AI doesn't, unlike social media, or at least the social media platforms we've built, there's no intrinsic reason that AI needs to be addictive. And it's actually it's getting cheaper and cheaper for anyone to spin up a platform. So you could say, oh, AI is kind of addictive. They're running these ads. They're trying to get us to build these products. Well, some sort of Christian organization, or even just an organization that cares about not addicting people to software, can put up a AI, like a ChatGPT clone that's a bit more neutral, that's non-addictive, that makes no claims of personhood, that just tries to give you sort of neutral information. And then if you're chatting to it a lot, says, you should probably talk to a human about this. Like, I'm not the person,
So addictiveness is a bug, not a feature. It's a way that the system can be abused, but not...
it's not necessary.
As you say, intrinsic. It's not a natural part of what it is.
Yeah, it just simulates conversations. You can have it simulate any kind of conversation. If you want to have a Socratic, have a Socratic conversation with you instead of give the answers and tell you how smart you are, you can have it do that as well. So I think there's some insight. So some of these are very weird because, so there's an example I actually heard about in a talk from this lady the other day, a researcher who was studying people who develop attachments to AI, artificial attachments. And in their spousal conflicts are both going to ChatGPT, both getting validated, and then coming back angry and saying, well, ChatGPT understands me, you don't. Basically it's on my side.
That sounds terrible.
Wow.
And to go back to system prompts, what she did with that couple was to show them that, look, you can have this different system prompt that instead of just validating your perspective, it asks you prompting questions to try to see from the other person's perspective, basically to unpack and understand and applying some of the social science principles to thinking about how that person is kind of approaching this rather than just seeking.
ChatGPT is a marriage counselor. I don't like that idea personally.
Okay, this is the thing. There's so many things I don't like or feel like weird, like ChatGPT is teacher, counselor, doctor, therapist, or whatever. And then I'm also torn between thinking that those are fundamental, human, caring for the body, caring for the soul, caring for the mind. These are human to human things. But on the other hand, I'm torn between that and seeing there are ways in which these can be leveraged effectively for that. And I think we as a community will have to figure out where we draw the line and how we deploy them to help people think in the same way with books. Books can be, they're just much less addictive, but they can be abused as, well, I don't confide in my books, but I live in my dream world with all my novels and I don't ever talk to people. That's
Socrates was against books 2,500 years ago, right? He said books actually destroy relationships because you're reading something and you can't ask it questions and it can't answer you back. It's much better to have a conversation.
I think that's exactly it. I think it's a turning point like that where we're having some trade-offs. And the optimism in me is that I just think there's so many areas where we try to accomplish a lot of things. And as Christians, we think transforming the world is good. And we don't think we are economic machines or this or that, but we think it's good to care for those, for everyone, for all of humanity. And I think language models, just like computers or calculators, to go back to our earlier analogy, allow us to do that in new ways. And give us some very cheap tools, incredibly cheap tools to do things that you could never have thought of before. So if your baseline is Stanford trained, doctor, then suddenly it feels like, man, why would we trade this for ChatGPT doctor? But if your baseline is no doctor in your region, you have to get into a helicopter, if you're in some sort of very remote area, or you just have to take a long trek, overnight trek to get to a good hospital. then maybe there's some ways in which we can save a lot of lives and improve a lot of quality of life, even from an education standpoint. Because I'm very torn, because like knowledge transfer feels like a human to human thing. And I'm very bought into that. But I think we have made some concessions, like you said, with books, where we accept that's not a human. Well, it is a human to human transfer, but it's mediated through a text.
Well, in a sense, ChatGPT is a human to human transfer. It's just mediated through a machine learning neural net, or whatever fancy word we want to apply to it.
Yeah. One thing I'd be very remiss if I didn't say is that, like, I would love to highlight that ChatGPT has not in any way got a monopoly on intelligence or like AI intelligence. And in the developer community, it's not until just recently that there's even been over the last year that there's been much controversy over who has the better model when it comes to software development. So most software developers have been using Anthropic's models or Google's models now. So OpenAI were very first. They took all like the mind share, it feels like. But I just kind of want to wave if people are saying, oh no, ChatGPT is going to run the world. It's going to do all these things. It's this like mega brain that's learning. Other people are building better models. And in fact, actually, the Chinese models are also absolutely incredible now and very cheap.
It's not ChatGPT that's going to rule the world. It's some kind of other AI. Yeah.
But it's not just like one AI. That's the thing, is like a lot of them are, well, maybe they're not plateauing, but they're reaching comparable levels of like intelligence. And they're becoming cheaper and cheaper to reach that level of intelligence. So Anthropic just released a model. Well, it's not important. The point is, instead of the model intelligence skyrocketing, you're seeing the model price dropping off a cliff. So very cheap models that you can run on your computer are getting closer and closer to the top level intelligence, which means when you think internationally about deploying AI systems that are good at giving healthcare advice or some sort of education or things like that, or not do some of the good things we think the internet does. If it does those good things, those are going to be cheaper and cheaper, and you'll be able to run them on just consumer device, laptops, instead of needing
And that's one of, like, I think for me, I typically see, people thought, oh, the internet's going to democratize the world and it's going to do all these great things. And then the internet is now largely in the hands of a few corporations which use it to do evil things. And it feels like we're going in very bad directions thanks to the social media companies and all of this. And so I tend to see this as just that ramped up even more. Do you have a sense that that's probably the case, or is there something different here that might give us hope?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I mean, it feels very much the same. It feels like it's like a neutral thing that could be that.
Austin, this is a podcast that's supposed to bring hope. What are you doing?
It's the beginning of the series. We can't just have all the hope right out the beginning.
We have to start in a depressing place, and then future
I found myself lost in the middle of the wood. Yeah, I think basically, if I could put the genie back in the bottle, like if you were to ask me, like, could you just forget it ever existed and put it back in the bottle? Like, I don't know what I would do if you gave me that choice. If I had that like switch in front of me, I don't feel like, oh yeah, I would just make LLMs. Of course. I think once they're here, there's lots we can do with them. And I think as Christians, I think we can get excited about the ways in which we get excited about technology to build cathedrals and hospitals in the first place. And when we wanted to push forward universities and have people be able to do more things, we think it's a huge lever. And I think that's a little dizzying to realize we have this so much more leverage for what we can do as humans. But I think as Christians, we actually are fundamentally optimistic about what people can do in the world, or at least I don't think we're just waiting for it to kind of fall apart. And if we are wanting to transform the world, and if we do use tools like this podcasting, and we're happy to have this, recording, software to do this, then I think we could likewise be happy for this and think about how can this help us, leverage the good work that people want to do in the world. So maybe it won't happen, and probably will be taken over by all these, evil corporations and things like this. But I think it's not intrinsic to the technology. I think like saying electricity and, oh man, electricity, we're going to have like electric chairs electric chairs. There you go. And yes, maybe we're going to have electric chairs, electric fire. We're going to do all these things. It's not necessary. The technology, even more than like the sort of like, I don't know if I would say it's neutral completely, but it's not implicitly got any sort of like ideology, even in the way it's trained in the most popular models they're trained right now. I think you see that with the Chinese models competing with the US models, because you can have ideology, any ideology you want, you can bake into it. It doesn't have to be any of the ones that we've seen so far. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper to bake any ideology into a model. So I think, sorry.
That's great. I mean, we can wrap up in a second. That's been very, very rich.
I think that you're encouraging us to have the virtue of magnanimity as we think about this, which to balance out our, the wisdom and prudence that's telling many of us to pause. So I appreciate that.
I knew Josh would be a enthusiast, a more positive voice than probably most of the other voices we're going to have on. So I'm glad to start off with Josh.
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe this might age like very poorly in 3 years when the killer robots are coming for us and we're all hiding, from.
That's right. We're going to be like, Josh said this wouldn't happen.
Yeah, Josh said it would be okay.
Well, Josh didn't actually say it wouldn't happen. He just said it might not.
Hopefully, we don't have to make it happen. Yeah. So for those of us stodgy old professors who are trying to be a stick in the mud and avoiding this at all costs, do you feel like we should be engaging with the Chat GPT right now, or do you feel like we can wait to see where things go?
So I think there will be some die down in hype when we realize the tools right now haven't yet met the promise of what the technology can be. Just like the year 2000, if you said, everyone's got to become an internet expert, or their company's got to be transformed. And then it's like, well, email's super useful, and a bunch of these other companies died. I think likewise, this will look retrospectively like very, very early days of the tooling and what it looks like. And I definitely think that following publications from places like OpenAI or what Sam Altman says is not getting educated on how to think about AI. So I think being very sober-minded about the intake, the sources that you intake, and the people who aren't incentivized or just promoting sensational sort of like a view of these, but who are thinking through them, building with them, and things like that. So I think, I guess in short, yes, I think engaging it is incredibly valuable at this time. I think offloading your brain to it, not so much, thinking it's going to destroy humanity. But I think the students are going to have to engage with it. I think that's the thing, is whether you think they're going to copy or not, it's not a long-term solution to say, don't use computers, they're bad for your brain. Like at least 20 years ago, that you just couldn't, that wasn't going to serve them through their career. And whether we like it or not, LLMs are going to be a part of everyone's, career, and academic or otherwise. And I think helping students think through that, as well as drawing on what the pre-LLM experience that you have, that they're not going to have as working professionals, and how this has shaped that, and the nuance in your thought there. I think there's so much that teachers and educators can do to help people think through it. But I think it's really hard because it's a really confusing technology for everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. You've given us a great deal to think about, and we've got a lot of information, a lot of wisdom, but also a lot of questions to ask future guests on this episode as well. So thanks for your time. It's been very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Faith at the Frontiers, a podcast that confronts challenges to the Christian faith with hope. If you liked this episode, then do subscribe to hear more like it in the future. For now, goodbye.